And joining us tonight is counterterrorism expert and advisor Gadi Adelman and former military intelligence officer Steve Rogers. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Steve, let's start with you. The U.S. is sending even more firepower to the Middle East. As we've mentioned, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group and a bomber task force are already in the region. Now, the USS Arlington, an amphibious transport landing dock used to move troops, and a Patriot surface-to-air missile battery are also on their way to the U.S. Central Command area. So what do you make of this, especially in the context of these reports that the U.S. could be sending troops?
Well, the president said today, as you stated, Michelle, that there's no plan to send ground troops into the area. But I can tell you that all the years I've been in the Navy, when we send that much firepower in any part of the world, we're sending a very clear message that in the event that there is any strikes against the United States, the response will be overwhelming. But I can tell you this, Michelle, one of the concerns that everyone has, and I would say Iran, the United States, all the players in the area, is what if there's a misstep? What if there's an accident? What if something happens that should not have happened? That could trigger a war. So hopefully the temperature is going to be lowered a little in order for something like that not to happen.
Steve, staying with you, what kind of misstep could occur given the situation? What is a potential situation that could happen that could trigger a U.S. response?
Well, let's say that you have some sort of a attack on a ship. All right. Well, without the accurate and credible intelligence as to who committed that act, someone might just decide, it could be a commander out in the field, it could be anyone, that someone in their mind led the attack and then they would strike. That's how these things happen, and hopefully that won't happen. But that's a misstep, and that could very well happen.
Well, speaking of attacks on ships, and Steve, I assume you mean U.S. ships here, there have been attacks on Saudi oil tankers, Gadi. Iran is denying responsibility for that, but Iran's proxy in Yemen, the Houthi militant group, is saying that they were the ones responsible for attacks on Saudi oil pipelines. So what do you think is really happening here? I mean, do you think that Iran is behind both of these attacks?
Well, you know, the Houthis claiming responsibility for it. One has to look at that. They're not going to go out and claim responsibility under these circumstances for something that they really probably had nothing to do with. I just would find that very hard to believe. Even though Iran is saying one thing, the Houthis know the situation. They know that both Iran and the United States are trying to back down away from this saber rattling, if you will, so there won't be a mistake or a misstep, as you mentioned. But I would find it rather hard to believe that they would come out and say they were responsible if they were not.
Well, you know, this all comes, Gadi, as we mentioned earlier, that the U.S. has been receiving credible warnings that Iran could be plotting some kind of an attack. And it's believed that that attack could potentially take place in Iraq. Talk us through that. What would that dynamic involve?
Well, you know, right now you've got forces from so many different countries involved in that area. But within Iraq, what you have going on right now, Iran is in Iraq, and many of their other groups, if you will, other operational organizations, other proxies, other sub-organizations are also in Iraq. And this is a problem not just for Iraq. This becomes a problem for that whole area, because of the ability that Iraq has with many of their missile and, you know, they're not only their cruise missiles, but short range, long range, and medium range ballistic missiles. That puts a lot of U.S. interests as well as U.S. military within their range. So this becomes a much larger problem, aside from the fact that also Israel is in their range now.
Steve, if a military confrontation can and would be avoided, do you see a diplomatic solution to all of this, keeping in mind that Iran has told the Europeans that they have a deadline to meet before it continues to enrich uranium regarding the nuclear deal? The U.S. is, of course, it's been a year since it's pulled out of the nuclear deal because it didn't believe that that would, in fact, prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon anyway. So if it's not going to be a military clash, how does the situation resolve itself?
Well, I believe that at the end of the day, there will be a diplomatic solution. And the reason is this. Look, everyone who leads a country on this planet understands that Iran has been a troublemaker worldwide. They export terrorism more than any other export from their country. That's number one. Number two, those carrier task forces out there, that military might that they're looking at day in and day out is a deterrent. It's letting them know if you don't come to the table, there are going to be serious consequences. So with a hammer over their head and with world leaders, no one wants to have a war. I think they're going to come to the table. And knowing this president, Donald Trump, he's a great negotiator. He'll get it done.
All right, Steve Rogers, thank you so much. Gadi Adelman, appreciate it as always.